Okay, so in this video I wanted to talk about inquiry and just kind of come back to basics with this and outline what we are actually doing here, or what the focus of this channel is, because I think how many words have I used since the beginning? How many concepts have I used to try and point to something which is not conceptual? There's a huge fundamental flaw in talking about this at all. But, there's a way around that. There certainly is a way around that. But it can be a stumbling block for a while. And I certainly have that experience. I think it's quite easy to, considering the amount of language that I'm using here, and the amount of resources that there are out there, I think it's quite easy to lose sight of how simple and direct this is. Concepts are alluring. Why did I say it like that? That's stupid. Alluring. There's almost kind of like a compulsive addiction to viewing the world and reality that way, which is certainly necessary. But when we're talking about what I talk about on this channel, we're passing that limit completely. We're going past the limits of conceptuality and definability. So one of the most important realizations in this, and I don't think this is actually clear until awakening, so to speak. I don't think it can be clear, really, fully clear, until this clarifies to a large degree, and that's part of it. But it's important to understand, so to speak, right? Or be directly clear that language can't touch this. What we're talking about is entirely transcendent of the limitations of language. So that means that there is no more or less accurate way to define this, because it's not definable. In that, the language does not matter. The language is unimportant. So, that might conjure up some kind of opposition in whoever's listening to this when I'm saying that the language doesn't matter. But, consider that the content of language is purely conceptual, is purely limited to an objectively knowable framework. That's its limitation. We can't accurately describe this. Any realised non-dual speaker will tell you the same thing. This can't be touched in language. It's beyond that. It's too free to be limited by conceptuality and objectivity. So that means language is rendered unimportant. And an understanding that we can't talk about this, that then allows us the freedom to talk about it entirely freely. That's what's so beautiful about the pointing thing, because I don't need to think about what I'm saying. I don't need to think about if I'm saying something that's objectively correct or objectively false, true or false. That what I'm talking about is transcendent of those polarities altogether. That's not important. That's not where I'm pointing. I'm pointing to where language can't take us, where objectivity and conceptuality can't reach. It's beyond that, or it's more simple than that. But we're bound to use language to communicate this. Partially, that's not all what's going on. But it's so sticky because it can become a fixation. And when we fixate on that, right, when we believe that, what the non-dual speakers are talking about is an actually definable, inherently existing reality with any sort of quality, when we believe that, it forms this subjective view. The subjective view is a limitation on this. That subjective view can only refer to an object. But what we're doing with inquiry and pointing is pointing back past that subjective view. But the magnetic and habitual tendency is to continue to relate to and refer to thought objects of experience that are distinct from anything else. But that's not what we're doing here. That's basically the big conceptual fixation with this, is like the first big recognition that there is something here that is not conceptual, that is past the limits of conceptuality. And it starts off as kind of like an intuitive feeling. You listen to the non-dual speakers and something in you knows that, but something in you also knows that it's not knowable in the usual way. It's not objectively definable. There's a limit here that we have to pass in order for this to become direct in the way that it's going to bring about any sort of insight. And when we hold that view, when these thoughts are charged with belief, it doesn't feel like a thought. It's not clear that that's a thought experience. It feels real. It actually feels real. And it feels like me. The real part about it is the me here, the identity that's here. So if we do a test right now, okay, and I say, imagine non-existence. Imagine the experience of non-existence. Clearly that's not possible, because any imagining you're going to have is going to be an experience of imagination. It's going to be a thought experience, a concept about what the experiencer thinks non-existence is. But you simply can't go there, because I'm pointing here beyond existence altogether with what that phrase refers to. Imagine non-existence, imagine not existing. So the substance of thought, the sense of the mind, the consciousness that I am, only exists. Its world is existence. That's its limitation. That's the limitation of consciousness, of self-awareness. It's limited to existing. This goes deeper than that. And the deeper it goes, the less knowable it is, because you can kind of know a sense of existence. It knows itself. But when we're talking about the deeper stages of this, no self-realization, we're going way beyond any sort of knowable experience. We're going way beyond experience itself. And that's only ever going to sound obscure when I try and describe it to you, an experiencer, from apparently, an experiencer here. That's why I don't often talk about the no self thing unless, I've talked about it a bit more recently. But it really, it can really kind of be a bit triggering for people sometimes, because the sense of existence is deeply tied to kind of survival. Stepping beyond the known, beyond beingness or existence or awareness, isn't something that you can willingly do, because the willing comes from the experiencer. So when we're confronted with these kind of questions, like, imagine what is this like when you die? What is it like to not exist? These questions just don't make sense, but we can feel something in it, that it points to something that might generate a fear response. That felt intuition is something that is coming, let's say, into experience, is something that can be felt here at an intuitive level that is beyond the limits of the mind. So we push that limit of the knowable, of concept, thought, objectivity, and we ask, where was I before I was born? What happens when I die? What is non-existence like? Here, where these questions point us to the limits of objectivity, to the limits of the known, even to the limits of experience and awareness, consciousness itself. Right? So, inquiry, good, effective inquiry, harnesses the power of that limitation, or what transcends that limitation, and it can only be felt, and it's only direct. It doesn't exist in time, and it's not even an experience. That's what's important. So this is why you can ask any inquiry question you want, but that's not the important part. The important part is, how does it direct attention, so to speak, in your experience? Does it direct attention away from the self-aware consciousness of the thought space of the mind into something here that transcends even that? Or does it direct attention more into thoughts, creating a kind of agitated thought experience? So the question can be anything. Like I said, the language isn't important. What is important is, let's say, how it moves attention, how it simplifies this experience in a way that moves the attention away from the habitual absorption in the thought experience in the known world or conceptuality. That's what inquiry does. Like, so, I mean, you could even use a really silly inquiry question. Some of them are going to resonate more. They're going to feel more relevant or potent. But we go past that limit anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to describe my own experience with this, because I do believe that's the most powerful way to transmit this. And when you're listening, open up to the possibility of something that is here, that is beyond the known, that is beyond conceptuality. I'm making this quite broad. I could make it very specific towards the kind of first awakening thing, but I'm just going to make it nice and broad. So, as I tell you this story, don't hold to importance the concepts. Don't believe I'm pointing to an actually distinct, actually existing experience called awakening. The language doesn't matter. Imagine it as a kind of artistic spoken word interpretation that points to something beyond the limits of the art is a good way to take it. I'm pointing beyond the limits of inherent existence, beyond the limits of permanence. I'm even pointing beyond the limits of experience. So use it to look into your own experience now and feel where I'm pointing to directly, experientially. You don't need to have one thought about this for it to be clear. That doesn't mean resist thoughts. That doesn't mean that the thoughts are bad. I'm just saying you don't need to have one thought about it. The thoughts will come, and that's okay. But this isn't a thought-based understanding. This is experiential and direct. So, in my own story, there was the unanswerable question of why can't I remember anything before I was born? Well, I feel like a limited entity. I have a start and I have an end. I'm born, I die. I can't imagine or don't know anything beyond the limits of this lifetime. So what is that? I can feel something here that at a very deep level that means that doesn't feel right. What I know about my limitations as a person doesn't feel right. What is non-existence? It's not something that's even vaguely tangible in the objective sense, but I can feel something about that in my experience. This unanswerable existential question mark that was kind of always in the background. So when I inquired, I felt deeply that question, that existential limit of the known, and it very much had to do with me, my life experience, my identity. I felt that with every fibre of my being, that there is something beyond what I know, there is something beyond this. It clearly in my mind can't understand or answer the question that I'm longing for an answer to. Clearly there's a limit here. It's beyond my capability to know this, but I could feel something. And I listened to the non-dual speakers and spiritual teachers, and when I heard that, something in me clicked. I was like, that's it, 100%, I know that. Something in me oriented itself towards that, and it was never the same after that. It came with a sense of comfort and even a thinning of that suffering that was generated by this unanswerable question. Sorry, I have a perpetual everlasting cold. So so then the the inquiry, when I inquired, it would be a question. The question would be, what is this? What am I? I didn't really use who am I used what am I, because at some level it was clear to me that what I am is beyond this person. So I would walk, I would inquire, I would investigate in a very pragmatic way this experience and ask, what is this limit? What part of me is beyond that limit? What am I that is here, seemingly having this human experience? What is it? And there were many times where the mind came up with an interpretation, like, I am so and so. It doesn't even matter. It's not the specifics of the interpretation. The mind which I deeply knew to be limited. My personal perceptive ability, my ability to understand and know my experience, I knew that was limited, but it still kept trying to come up to give me an answer, to define something for me so that I could feel some sort of comfort and resolution and conclusion. That didn't work. It had a funny way of kind of generating beliefs, and the beliefs were ones that were satisfying in a way as a conclusion, so that I could just kind of pull my attention away from this inquiry and get on with my life. But they didn't work. The thing was still there, the drive was still here. So the more I inquired, the less there was any sort of conceptual framework around it, and the more deep and intuitive the investigation became, such that it wasn't even phrased in language anymore. It was just a feeling. It was just a longing for the end of the experience of separation. And I looked out for it habitually for so long, and that would be towards a thought object, an object of knowing, a thought experience I was having that looked to provide imagery and language that seemingly would help me, the person, define this in some way, find an answer to this. And the more that went on, the less believable that was, and the less that even happened. The less that... So it's like the thought forms and the concepts that I had used all my life to orient myself in life and kind of know my experience stopped working in regards to this. It wasn't doing anything for me anymore. But I started to notice that there was some sort of movement going on here. There was some point of view that seemed to be inherent here of me, the me that knows my experience. So the more I inquired, the more these thought forms calmed down. There was more clarity around what am I that's looking, what am I that's asking this, as an identity, as a person, apparently. And I noticed there was this movement going on of me at the centre of my experience, inherently existing as a consistently here view, relating to my experience, relating to something in some sort of relationship, some sort of subject-object relationship. So I noticed that as my mind's very language-based, as the language that was describing and trying to label, categorise and confirm something about experience, something about what I think experience is like. As that started to calm down, it became less real, because there was this real feeling of me that was relating to something called my mind and my thoughts, something called awakening. And it didn't seem like a thought, because it felt like I was investigating something real, a real experience, a real reality from the inherent point of view of a real me. And it felt like me. But as this started to calm down, what started to become clear is that the me that I felt to be real was continually being reinforced in the context of this subject-object relationship. So it would refer back to itself in the language of the thoughts. It would talk itself into existence through an excessive focus in the space of thought and what that was talking about from this point of view that was kind of hidden in plain sight. What the inquiry did was it offered up a question that didn't have an answer to it, and I knew that, but the mind kept trying to answer it. So in Zen there'll be the koans, and that's like a paradoxical, nonsensical question. Its purpose is to provide a question and looking into experience without an answer. It can't be answered objectively. So what is the sound of one hand clapping? My mind thought it was really smart, and it kept answering the questions in these really complicated ways. It kept throwing up these answers, but that was just a distraction. It was keeping attention and focused on the objective thoughts, focused on the known, focused on what I can know about my experience. What had to happen is it had to turn back, relax enough so that the point of view called me, that feels like me, that feels real, had the chance to clarify for what it is, and what it is non-existent. What it is does not exist. It's not even here. It was merely continually reinforced in the context and the content of thought. The thought was talking about it, backwards extrapolating it into an apparent existence. It was felt to be real. But upon investigation, it couldn't be found. Couldn't be found. I was simply just here. I was just simply wide awake and aware. There was a sense of beingness, or a sense of pure knowingness or pure subjectivity. And it eventually clicked that this is it. This is what the spiritual teachers are talking about. And when it clicked at a very deep level, it's almost like I had permission to let go of the concepts. I had given myself permission to let that go. Some part of me knew this already, and it was continually distracting with conceptuality. When that function was exposed for what it was, which is just something being suggested to be real in thought that wasn't actually real. Me, the subject, relating to my objective experience. When it clicked that all that's happening here are thoughts. It's just thoughts, that's all. It's just thinking, or thinkingness. Then the substance of that experience became the most obvious thing in experience. And the substance, you could use many words to describe it, like awareness, beingness, knowingness, I am. The substance of this thinking experience. That was it. It's here. It's already here. I know myself. I never was apart from myself. There never was an awakening. Something unreal stopped happening, and the unreal thing that stopped happening was a mere assumption that had no evidence in experience other than a belief in the content of thoughts. that was made to feel real through the co-arising of emotions, the emotionally charged beliefs. So like the sense of self is an emotionally charged belief. So then what happens, right? There was essentially the initial awakening, right? It's something loses its reality permanently. It can never be real again. At a very deep level, something changes. It's like the belief in me as a separate character has been dispelled through clear seeing. But it's kind of like a glimpse of no self, what is pointed to when we talk about no self or anatta. Because the identity has this very sneaky way of restabilizing itself here, and that takes the form of something inherently existing, like they talk about in the Buddhist Dharma, inherent existing and impermanence. Something permanent here that inherently exists, and that takes a form, and it might be so vague that you can't even name it. For me, it took the form of like, I am everything, I am awareness, I am one mind. This all appears within what I am and is made of what I am. This has a way of reifying something that's not real. Again, it's a felt to be real belief that is a context that neatly ties all of this up into something that is essentially knowable. You know, it's the world of the known takes a hit and it decomplexifies itself down to its most fundamental form, which is essentially the source, the substance of consciousness, of mind, which is I am. I am here, I inherently exist. The I is not clear anymore. The self kind of goes out the window, and you see that, you know, I've clearly seen that I am not limited to this self, that that's not real. But the I takes on a different form. It hides in plain sight where it can't be seen, which is like an invisible awareness that's somehow subtly in the background to all experience. The one dreamer's mind in which this dream appears. You know, it can't be found. So then the inquiry goes more deeply into the sense experience, and we start to look at, like, now I know myself to be this, not a separate thing in this, but this. Then what am I? What are my qualities? What is the experience of being me, infinite awareness or whatever? And that experience through the senses will take you past the limitations of mind. Will take you past awareness, something called awareness, beingness, I am. It will take you past that. But it's kind of like, it's not something you can want, because the sense of the one here that wants is made of that substance of mind, can't willingly go past its own limitations. So again, the inquiry becomes a bit more intuitively skillful, and we still have that sense of there's still a limit to this. There's a context going on here. I feel like I am here. You know, like where I am might not necessarily be clear, but I feel like I am here, I exist. And that has in it still the suggestion of non-existence. From that inherent existence, the suggestion of non-existence is disturbing. And that's what kind of led to the kind of solipsistic experiences that I had. with this. It was things like, what am I? Am I just like this infinite entity floating in hyperspace on my own, like making up a story about a world with other me's in it to entertain myself, like stuff like that. You know, I felt that deeply. I think that's why I was able to drop below that, to simplify experience past that. I felt the duality in it: existence, non-existence, being, not being, life, death. So this is when we go past any polarity of opposites whatsoever, and the only way to go past that is to open up to something that is beyond the source of experience, the source of mind. And I would say, like, the way to do that is through sense experience, through the senses, because there's something here about the senses that is too mysterious to be defined by the known, that you just can't think about. So then the investigation goes towards the senses, and then I saw how my mind was interpreting the totality of my physical experience of being in the world. And there were again lots of these assumptions that are in place based off of the primary assumption of me being an inherently existing thing here, looking out at an inherently existing world out there. Eventually those assumptions clarify for what they are, which is just a thought interpretation. But these ones are kind of deeply tied into this sense of being a physical body. So in order to see through that, there had to be a lot of really intense, kind of visceral, physical, emotional release, because the augmented reality of me looking at a world, it was all referring back to a center point, a point of view, but that point of view really wants to protect itself, so it's not willing to see past its own limitations, because it's not safe. It doesn't feel safe. What it feels like is death. That's what it feels like. Legitimately, it feels like death. So then it becomes like, how deeply do you want to go into this? Is no self really something that you think you want? Is something in you willing to investigate experience in such a radical way that you deconstruct the reality of your entire experience of being a separate person in a separate world? It might not be. It might not be. Inevitably, people will ask me after saying that like, how do you function when you aren't experiencing in a real way yourself as a separate individual in a separate world? And the answer to that is it was never like that anyway. It was just an illusion. What falls away is something that's not real. So life goes on, continues just as it was. Things may change relatively for the character, but this ultimately has no implications whatsoever. Ultimately, there are no implications to this. So that's just a kind of a walkthrough of what inquiry was to me and how it came about. And the important part is we're investigating the nature of self, the nature of identity, what I feel like I am. And we can't really look there if we are putting great importance on concepts, on something objective that can be defined. You know, it's not really it's not really up to the person how that goes. It just depends if there's a deeper movement here. So if you're watching these videos and you know why you're here, like, you know, I don't sell this really, because I know that if you're here, you're watching this, you know why you're here, and I knew as well. I know as well. It's something that you need to talk about or say, like how this is beneficial for the person. It's like, it's not like that. Or why you want this. It's like, it's not like that. You just, this is what it is. Like, I know why you're here. If you know what I'm saying with that, then that's the thing that drives you through this. That's the thing that the kind of fire that burns away the structure of self. That really deep intuitive movement towards this, that you start to get in touch with more as you start to inquire. So I'm going to do a channel announcement video, and I'm just going to talk about some of the stuff I'm going to do, and to get you all involved in that as well. But I'll post that up probably maybe later tonight. And also I got a laptop, so see if I can figure out how that works. Anyway, that'll do it. Talk to you next time.